We started D2C because of my Instagram following. So when we launched pre-orders, I think I had about just like 10,000 followers or something. So nothing crazy, but it was just like a nice test market just to see product market fit in a cheap way.
Hello and welcome to Starting Small. My name is Nagle, and what you're about to hear is a resilient story to an entrepreneur's journey over the brand that we know and consume today. At Starting Small, I believe that everyone has a story to tell under one philosophy. Everyone starts small. Even these founders have once started where you are, in their parents' kitchen, basement, out of a wagon, and many more. At Starting Small, we discuss the strategies used, the obstacles overcome, and the successes of an entrepreneur's journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Starting Small, and make sure to leave a review to let us know how you enjoyed it. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Ali Hogar of Oat Haus. Ali, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Of course. I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, in San Diego, and I would say my upbringing was like very active. Both my parents were super into, running, biking. They actually met at a running club in La Jolla. So my whole just childhood was very filled with lots of that. Sports, I grew up playing volleyball, and never thought of myself actually as an entrepreneur. I was pre-med in
Mhm.
college, so very different from what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
I think I was, just very terrified of instability, which is also ironic. So I was like, oh, I'll just become a doctor, and that's very stable and predictable. And then sort of realized about halfway through being pre-med that I hated blood. I hated sick people and I hated hospitals. I don't know why
Mm,
I wanted
yeah.
to pursue that field. Maybe because my mom was in the medical field, but yeah. And so then I kind of just had to finish out, that major because I was like so far deep in it.
Yeah.
I ended up going into tech in San Francisco, which is sort of the classic pipeline.
Yeah.
So I went to college undergrad at UC Berkeley, and then, loved my time there, but again, just sort of felt a little unfulfilled by working in tech. I think it was really cushy and nice, but really wanted more. And that's sort of what led me to doing
Mm,
my own thing.
amazing. Growing up, just kind of flashing back a little bit, would you say that you had an entrepreneurial mindset, say, with your family? They encourage lemonade stands or products, anything like that?
I don't know. I think actually not really. I think I always had like really kind of ideas, and I was always thinking of different ways to sort of improve my day-to-day life, but I never considered myself entrepreneurial from an early age, just in the traditional sense. My mom
Yeah.
was a dentist, my dad was a fifth grade school teacher, so just sort of I guess my mom started her own practice, so that was,
Okay.
entrepreneurial in that way. Um,
Totally.
wasn't really modeled to me in, yeah, like the traditional way. I think, as I mentioned, like doing more of the kind of conventional route was really much more what was taught to me.
Mhm.
But looking back, yeah, I think there's little things like I just remember, taking a shower and thinking, that's so weird. Like, why isn't there, why wouldn't we have a little screen that we can set the water temperature to, instead of
Mm,
using knobs?
yeah.
Just like things like that, where I always remember thinking of little improvements, but I never, again, thought of myself as an entrepreneur because I wasn't very numbers oriented.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, in love with like spreadsheets and and
Totally.
finance. And I wasn't also very money driven by money, and I still am not. Obviously, it's important with any business, but I think
Yeah.
my understanding of what it means to be an entrepreneur has definitely expanded since
For
then.
sure. Amazing. Well, going into UC Berkeley, then finishing this degree, I'm curious, what kind of were like your aspirations at this point? Not really fully into nutrition yet. Did you go to any? Did you work any jobs? Or I understand that you eventually studied nutrition. What did that period look like?
Yeah, so college was a really interesting time for me. Again, everything happens for a reason, but I think looking back, I was just so creative my whole life. Very much, just I excelled kind of naturally at more the marketing creative side of things, branding.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, just I think stubbornness and ego and fear kind of led me to just, stay in my science degree lane. And I really struggled in college. I think, obviously Berkeley is a really competitive school, but it was just, I think at some point, you have to realize that you're just swimming upstream and
Yeah.
you're doing something that isn't actually, in line with your natural abilities. And so I remember so clearly just, looking around at my classmates in all of these like science classes. And I had like three tutors for physics. And,
Mm.
growing up, school came pretty not easily to me because I did work really hard, but I don't know, I was just used to putting in the work and then getting good grades. And I think it was the first time in my life where, I was really putting in a lot of work and asking for help, with tutors and just not performing. And that's, I think, really discouraging for people.
Yeah.
And so I think looking back, I probably should have pivoted and said, hey, maybe this isn't the right path for me, but just continued on. So I think that was sort of a challenging time. And, yes, I was pre-med, but my major was nutrition.
Yeah.
But being, Berkeley, it was just very science focused. I think they actually
For
changed the
sure.
name to metabolic biology since then because it
Oh
really was,
wow.
I thought it was going to be a lot more like nutrition focused, but it was kind of just human
Wow.
metabolism. And so I ended up working in tech for a health tech company and was on the marketing team. And that was really the first time that I realized, okay, this is something that I love and I'm good at. And it kind of lights me up. So that was sort of my first foray into the world of business and marketing.
Yeah.
Um, didn't use my nutrition degree at all, didn't use, my science degree at all, but I still felt like it was somewhat related, kind of being like health tech.
Totally.
But during this whole time, which I haven't mentioned, was I struggled really severely with multiple eating disorders,
Mm.
which is what led to the genesis of our company. But yeah, and I think that was really an easy way for me to disguise that was being a nutrition student all through college because it really hit its, peak during college, but I could always say, oh, I'm just like the healthy one, I'm a nutrition student.
Yeah.
And people didn't really, I guess, notice because they thought that as well. So, uh,
Mm.
yeah, that was sort of one piece of the story as well.
Wow. So I'm curious as this fascination with nut butter spread specifically evolved, and you're working at a tech startup. Did you ever leave? Did you ever go into CPG, or what does this transition in your life look like when you're founding your own company from a tech startup or from the tech side? Did you go to any companies after that, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I know. It's such a random transition. No, actually, I went straight. So the company I worked at before is called Doximity.
Hmm.
They've since IPO'd. They're sort of like the LinkedIn for healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
Really awesome company to work for. I actually loved my time there. I worked there for about almost 4 years. Um, and no, I was working at Doximity and started sort of on the side, just documenting my recovery journey on
Mm.
Instagram, as any millennial, would. And, um, and actually told my audience on Instagram about my eating disorder before even telling my friends and family because it just felt easier in a way. It was sort of like this black abyss, versus actually telling people who knew me in my real life. So that sort of became almost like an online diary for me to just share my journey. And that's how I started to amass a little bit of a following on there.
Yeah.
But never thought of social media or Instagram as, a way that I could become like that could be my career. I don't think
Yeah.
being a content creator, this was about 2016, 2017. And so it really wasn't, I was like, oh, maybe I'll get some free, Siete chips out of it. But like, I was never thinking I could actually monetize in the way
Yeah.
that people do now. So yeah, there wasn't anything in between Doximity and Oat Haus. But I did, really kind of where granola butter came from was a big part of my recovery journey was actually
Mm.
adding my fear foods back into my diet. So I was terrified for a long time of peanut butter and almond butter and sort of
Mm.
those calorie dense spreads. And so as I started to add those back in, I had a really hard time digesting nuts. And so
Mm.
I had never had nut allergies. But my nutritionist at the time was like, oh, you should try, sunflower seed butter, soy nut butter. And I was like, okay, I've never had to try these because obviously I don't have allergies. And
Yeah.
I tried them and I was like, these are so bad. Like I was just blown away that, basically they were the only option on the market
Mm,
that's nut free. So that's sort of when I started, getting into this like mad scientist headspace. And again, I think tying it back to kind of your question earlier about, being an entrepreneur from an early age, I think it
yeah.
was just so natural to me to be like, okay, this doesn't exist, something doesn't exist that fits my needs. I'm just going to create it.
Yeah.
And so I was in my kitchen in San Francisco and just playing around with like different ingredients. And it was again the time when oat milk was sort of on the rise, with
Yeah.
oat and everything. It was, yeah, about 2017. So I was like, oh, interesting. Like if they could make a milk out of oats, I could make a spread out of oats. And that's sort of where the idea came from.
Mm,
But for, about a full year, I worked on, Oat Haus just nights and weekends. So I still kept my day job with tech. I was pretty risk averse and didn't want to just like, work for myself from the get go. So worked on it for about a year until we got into Whole Foods and then pressed juicery and kind of realized it was about that point where I just couldn't do both,
yeah.
um, either one well. So then I left my full-time job.
Wow. I'm curious, like in this year span, what did that look like from your POV? Were you packaging, mixing, formulating yourself every weekend, shipping that out? What did that look like?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was such a shit show. So I am not the only founder. So my partner Eric, we've been together for a long time,
Mhm.
almost 8 or 9 years. We went to college together. So he was actually working at Accenture at the time in consulting. And he was, liking his job, but he was traveling a lot back and forth from SF to New York. And he was like the classic, like, he was going to become an entrepreneur, like just who you think of as an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
When I told him about this idea, he was the one that was kind of like, oh my gosh, we have to do this. Where I was like, I don't know, it's a cool idea, but I selfishly was like, oh, I'm just making this for myself. And I was
Yeah.
content with just my tech job. So I give him credit for kind of like pushing me out of the nest to explore something like this. So him and I started working on early, MVPs, and then we actually had a trip to Paris planned, just like vacation.
Hmm.
And it was right around the same time we were thinking like, who can help us sort of scale this recipe? Who can help us, perfect it? Because we both love food, but we're not culinary chefs.
Yeah.
And he had this friend who he went to summer camp with in LA growing up. His name's Ari, and he was actually working in Paris at the time, helping to open a restaurant. And he's worked at Michelin star restaurants. He's a very talented chef. And so it was just very serendipitous. Like we were already out there. We kind of, met up with him for drinks, pitched him on the idea. And he was really burned out from the fine dining industry. I don't know if you know anything about it, but obviously
Yeah.
it's really like grueling
Totally.
industry to work in. And so he was like super dead from that and looking for something new. So we actually brought him on as our third co-founder. And yeah, that was again September 2017. And so from then, for that whole year was really tough because Eric and I were living in San Francisco. Ari had moved back to San Diego, which is where he's also from.
Mm,
And he started working from September to March, which is of 2018, which was when we launched pre-orders. He was just perfecting the recipe. Eric and I were flying down almost every weekend to San Diego to help him, work on things. And then once we launched pre-orders, that's when we really had to start making the product.
mm,
So early days, sales are super volatile, as you know.
yeah.
And so we didn't want to invest in, a facility or anything like that. So we ended up just renting, space in this commissary kitchen in San Diego and just it was pay by the hour.
Yeah.
And it was just, the early days were so funny because it was like Eric and I were still working full time. We would fly down every weekend and help Ari all weekend just make product. And we were still making our product in Vitamix blenders. And it was just like so manual,
Yeah.
we're pouring stuff into jars and we're working. I mean, we were so tired. We were working, all through the night pretty much. And then from there just started, slowly growing. But Eric, Ari, and I made the first 100,000 jars ourselves before
Wow.
we hired our first employee. A lot of that was in Vitamix blenders. So Yeah, finally reached the point where the commissary kitchen owners were like, you guys have to leave. Like, you're taking over everything. Um,
Mm,
because there just wasn't enough storage for our ingredients and stuff there because it was, yeah, it was a small space. So we are like busting at the seams. So we
yeah.
got kicked out of the commissary kitchen and then figured, okay, number one, we should go full time with this. Number two, we need to find a bigger space.
Mm,
So that's when we moved into our bigger space in San Diego.
wow. So at this point, is this where you step off of your tech job? And are you guys fully D2C up until this point? I understand you have retail now. What did that look like?
Yeah, so yes, good question. We started D2C because of my Instagram following. So when we launched pre-orders, I think I had about just like 10,000 followers or something. So nothing crazy, but it was just like a nice test market just to see product market fit
Totally.
in a cheap way because we were bootstrapped for the first 2.5 years. And yeah, and we didn't know anything about retail. We didn't know anything about the food industry, keep in mind,
Yeah.
or CPG at least. And so we were like, okay, well, we know tech. So, and D2C seems, the most similar. So
Yeah,
that's why we started there. And I love social media. I love building a community on there. So that also was, my background.
for sure.
Um, and so, yeah, we ended up approaching Whole Foods. There was really in the beginning, I'm going to be honest with you, there was no rhyme or reason. There was no strategy. We were like, let's just approach Whole Foods. Like that seems like a good account. Didn't have any employees. Like this was all, basically me doing all of our sales. So
Wow.
because I didn't know the food industry, we didn't work with brokers, distributors, anything like that. So I was on LinkedIn and I remember searching like, Southern California Whole Foods buyer. And I ended up finding our buyer actually. And of course, LinkedIn didn't give her email. So I'm like just playing around with, first initial dot last name at wholefoods.com, different combinations of that, first name dot last name until
Yeah.
I didn't get a bounce back. Finally didn't get a bounce back, didn't get a response for months. I'm like, okay, this is probably just the wrong email. Then I get a response and she's like, oh, I'd love to try samples. Send samples. Again, no response for a few months. I'm like, they hated it. Then we were actually on our way to our first Expo West. We were exhibiting first trade show. This
Yeah.
was, I guess, March 2019. And they said, we got the email in the Uber. They were like, we want to bring you in to 50 stores. And we were freaking out. We were like, oh my gosh, and now 50 stores is like so small, but at
Yeah.
the time it was just such a big deal. Um, and so, yeah, we launched with them June of 2019. But still at this point, retail was so, so small for us. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, we had no idea what we were doing in retail. And I think, if anyone's listening that's just starting out, obviously, like retail is so amazing and can be obviously so make or break, but it's expensive and it's such a long game.
Mm,
And it's very time and work intensive. So, and capital intensive. And so for us, we were like, oh, we'll just be on the shelves and like, people are going to see granola butter and we're just going to fly off the shelves because it's an interesting product, which, as you know, is not the case.
yeah.
Um, so we did okay. Like I would say, they expanded us to 4 more regions, added another SKU. So we were doing well enough that they wanted to expand us, but we weren't turning top of the category by any means for the first few years. And
Yeah.
then brought on our VP of sales, rebranded, and now we've been crushing it in retail, but it really took a few years to kind of find our groove. So that was like a
Wow.
big learning for us in retail.
For sure. As the brand evolves so rapidly, I'm curious, how has your marketing strategies changed, starting with like just organic reach at the early days? Did anything change, especially going into retail, that you noticed you had to amp up?
Yeah. So our marketing strategy has always been really community first,
Hmm.
community forward, especially social forward as well. And I think, with retail, that actually really helps is having a strong online community because,
Yeah.
anytime we launched into Sprouts nationwide in May, and they already told us we're, the number 4 SKU in the store. And, that's just because and that's behind private label, behind, some of the top spreads,
Hmm.
brands that you and I both know. And that was really shocking to me because we're not doing any demos there. We barely started, just doing marketing with Sprouts. And I think what it really, was from is actually our community being so loyal.
Mm,
We did a big influencer push with Sprouts. So we sent out, these PR boxes that had, we actually did like a custom label that was like Oat Haus and Sprouts. And then we sent these empty jars with soil in them and like little like gardening little seeds. And we said
Yeah.
like sprouting into retail, whatever. It was like kind of cheesy, but and we sent it to a bunch of influencers. And so I think doing that digital push, to in person actually has been really beneficial for us because, we're still pretty bootstrapped. We've raised about 600K to date in total,
Okay.
which is not a lot compared to a lot of food companies
Yeah.
of our size. So everything we do is super, super lean. But yeah, I think in terms of things that have changed, really with retail, obviously there's certain things like demos and IRCs and things that do move the needle, from that regard, but it's always going to be digital first and always going to be
Yeah.
community first. We also have a close friend story on Instagram where we add all of our subscribers.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yeah, our website subscribers. And that's been really fun because they're so engaged. And so
Mm,
we will let them know, any news or any flavors, we kind of include them in that before we announce it publicly. So they feel very a part of the journey.
for
Um,
sure.
yeah, from that perspective.
Amazing. With that marketing, what have you found to be like your main demographic, would you say, especially for just disrupting this category?
Yeah, I think we actually fall into about three different buckets, which has been kind of challenging from a marketing perspective because,
Yeah.
obviously you appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. But it's really number one, people who are, nut butter consumers. So they don't have allergies. They eat peanut butter and almond butter and love it, but
Mhm.
they're just kind of sick of those same old choices. Because you think about the spreads category, it's pretty antiquated compared to, a lot of other categories that have seen so much innovation.
Yeah.
The past few years, it's like, okay, maybe there's some mixed nut butters that's pretty much the only innovation. It's like peanut butter and almond butter are the main ones.
Yeah.
So I think people are just kind of bored, to be honest with you. And so that is our biggest consumer where it's like, they still eat peanut butter and almond butter, but they really are looking for that novelty, that innovation. And then obviously the taste profile is super exciting to them
Mm,
because it's more of a mix of like a sweet spread and a nut butter. That's probably the biggest one. It's like the health conscious millennial. And
yeah.
then right behind that is actually parents of kids in nut free schools.
Mm,
So it's actually not kids who have allergies, but it's much bigger than that because a lot of the schools now are nut free,
mm,
just because allergies are on the rise, especially younger
yeah.
ages because kids, obviously want to share and they don't know.
Yeah.
So the schools will just say, okay, don't pack your kids peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So then parents, that was actually a market I had no idea about because I don't have kids
Yeah.
until after we launched. And all these parents were coming out of the woodwork being like, yo, my kid won't eat sun butter, which is usually what people pack. And they need, I've been packing them like cheese sandwiches. Like I got crazy messages from parents. And so they were like, we need this.
Wow.
So it was really cool. And obviously parents, have a lot higher kind of purchasing power than younger demographics. And then the last one, which is probably the smallest one, is people who are looking for that Nutella cookie butter taste profile, but they want something that makes them feel good too.
Totally.
So kind of like a better for you dessert sweet spread.
Amazing. Well, with flavor expansion to today, I'm curious, what would you say is the top seller out of your lineup?
Yeah, so we obviously started with more of like our everyday line, which is, original vanilla chocolate. And those I think kind of lend better to putting with things, so on toast, on fruit, etc.
Yeah.
But what we've learned, which, again, through having a very engaged community, is people want that indulgent flavor. So our
Mm,
customer, yes, they are, looking for that better for you product, but more than that, they just want something that tastes really amazing.
for sure.
So we actually kind of started launching more indulgent flavors. So cookie dough, birthday cake, brownie batter. We have a really exciting another indulgent flavor coming in 2 weeks. And those I think just have blown everything else out of the
Mm,
water. And what also is cool about those is people tend to eat them out of the jar, like a cookie dough,
yeah.
product. So it's more like a snacking occasion, which has really boosted, velocity in retail and obviously kind of repeat purchase rates because
Yep.
instead of, like a peanut butter, I guess some people eat peanut butter out of the jar, but this really resembles more like, a sweet spread, and just something you can kind of go to town on. So we get lots of people that are like, oh my gosh, I crushed this in like 48 hours, or I killed this jar in 24 hours. And
Yeah.
so that is really rare in our category because normally, you go to this grocery store and you buy peanut butter every like 3 weeks or something.
Yeah.
So that's something that's been also exciting from a business perspective of just how quickly people are going through our product with those flavors.
Amazing. Well, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you could share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of mental health with entrepreneurship. So, and obviously in honor of Mental Health Day was, I think, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
That has been something that has just really tested me throughout this journey. And I'm lucky enough that my partner is my co-founder. So we're obviously sort of going through this together, but
Mhm.
I actually see two different therapists. So regular talk therapy and then also somatic therapy, which is like a body-based therapy, which has been really cool. And I see those, every alternating weeks. So I end up seeing someone weekly.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just been so crucial. And I wish that I had started right when we started the business or even before, because it's just so trying, and obviously if you're not even an entrepreneur, like therapy is really helpful for anyone. But I
Mhm.
think especially with entrepreneurship, there's just something about it that I've actually felt a lot of isolation and loneliness from being an entrepreneur, especially the bigger that we've gotten,
Yeah.
weirdly. And none of my friends really are entrepreneurs, so that maybe could be why, but just feeling like, yeah, no one really understands sort of what I'm going through. Even other founders, every business is so different. So it's like,
Yeah.
I have so many founder friends and I'm grateful for that and that does help. But having a therapist or someone you can talk to and just kind of like vent about what you're going through is super helpful because even, Eric, my partner, I don't want to vent to him about some things. Like maybe I want to vent about him. So I
Yeah.
don't like tell, so it's like helpful to have that third
For
party.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, Ali, thank you so much for joining me today. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Oat Haus at oat.house.